Hello, everyone. It's me, Chelsea Fagan, your host, founder, and CEO of The Financial Diet, and woman who loves talking about money. And often when we're talking about money on TFD, we're talking about what we're earning. Now, at the end of the day, no matter how frugal you are, no matter how many things you cut out of your budget, no matter how many better choices you're making, for most of us, at some point, we are going to have to focus on earning more. Not just because it is where we can make bigger increases and strides in our long-term goals, but also because we all deserve to be getting compensated as fairly as possible for the work that we do. And especially when it comes to things like negotiation and advocating for ourselves, we know very well that women, who are the vast majority of people who listen to this show, are not nearly as aggressive when it comes to advocating for themselves. Most of them don't negotiate, and especially don't negotiate at the initial offer stage of a job, which is the time at which your starting salary is set, which, if your raises are percentage-based, which they often are, is going to be the number from which all subsequent increases in pay are going to be based. So when you fail to negotiate, when you fail to advocate for yourself, you're not just cheating yourself in that moment, but for every future moment that you're at that company. We've also talked quite a bit on this channel about how for most people, because their biggest income is going to be from their primary job, the biggest increases are going to come from that primary job, and often the largest increases in salary are going to come from changing companies and changing roles, rather than moving up in one corporate ladder for very long periods of time. But there's a lot more nuance when it comes to how to navigate our careers, how to navigate HR as a company, how to work with other people, how to deal with other people who, quite frankly, are kind of difficult to work with, and basically just strategize our careers in a way that makes them not just as lucrative as possible for us, but also as sustainable, as enjoyable, as fulfilling. My guest today is someone who used to be a startup executive and has been at all different places in the career ladder, but who decided that she was just tired of making money for old rich white dudes, as she put it, and decided to leave to become a professional career strategist and YouTuber who helps women, and really anyone who wants to tune in, but mostly women, learn how to do all of the things I just talked about and more in their own careers. Without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome today's guest, Jennifer Brick.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. Thanks to Quility for supporting the Financial Confessions. Get life insurance in 10 minutes or less. To learn the who, what's, and why of life insurance, visit Quility.com/TFC. I'd like to thank Nutrafol for supporting TFC. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement. You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support TFC by going to Nutrafol.com and entering the promo code TFC to save $10 off your first month subscription plus free shipping on every order. So obviously I teed you up a little bit there, but I'd love to just start by talking about what exactly it is that you do in your work and what led you to want to do this work.
Yeah, so my work right now really focuses on helping women and anyone who's really struggling in their career find the steps to career success. And it was inspired by my own journey. I moved to New York 12 years ago, and I have a degree in criminology from a no-name university up in Canada. So I didn't have a lot of the things that most New York people have. So I felt really behind the eight ball because I was trying to get another job in technology. And I knew that there was a way that I could position myself, and that's what I started to do. And luckily I was able to land a good job after a bad offer, which I'm sure we can talk about today. And once I got into that role, I realized that I didn't want to just be in that role for forever. I wanted to grow my scope of work. I wanted to grow my income, and I wanted to have a bigger impact. And I started reading books. I started to kind of consume any information that I could, but it was all very male-oriented, or the books that I was reading that were for career women told you what the problem was, but not how to solve it. So I set about figuring it out. So I was really lucky to work for some amazing female leaders. So I really looked up to them, watched what they did, and started getting into the research and psychology in terms of career advancement, power dynamics at work, and how to get forward. And that's how I accelerated my own career. And of course, once I did it, I didn't want to keep it a secret. So I started teaching basically anyone that I could. So starting with my team, then my company, and then I decided that I wanted to do that full time because that was really felt like my passion and my purpose in life.
I love that. And now you have this book.
And now I have this book. Yeah.
For those who are watching on YouTube, she is gorgeous. This is really beautiful. I love this.
The whole book is such a vibe. I am so proud of this book. The publisher did like the most incredible job on the design of it. And obviously, I did such a good job on the insides.
You did.
It's not a traditional career success book. So initially, when I started writing Career Glow Up, it was going to be a traditional book, but I was approached by my publisher and their format is workbooks. So it's not just reading about what you should do, it's about tactically applying each step along the way. So it's not just, oh, well, you need to find a mentor. It's, okay, how are you actually going to network and find people, especially if you're like me, a shy introvert?
So you wrote the book. You wrote the book. You have this YouTube channel that now has well over 100,000 subscribers. Yeah. And, you're talking about, for example, in the subtitle of your book, you say owning your ambition. Now, something that we kind of talk about a lot at TFD, we've done a fair amount of content on like the downfall of the girl boss era. Yes. And a lot of the figureheads of that era who turned out to be somewhere on the spectrum of scammer, ranging from just like very bad boss to like serving 7 years in federal prison. And I think for a lot of people, and to some extent myself included, these messages that heavily center around ambition and forward movement can feel like my hackles go up in terms of how do we separate out creating a career that is healthy and sustainable and feels good for us and meets our needs with becoming overly defined by our careers, which I think is often the trap that the previous iteration of career-oriented feminism fell into.
Yeah, I think one of the fundamental problems with kind of the girl boss era was that it was really based on meeting patriarchal standards as a woman at work. So it was adopting what was working for men and blending in with the boys club as opposed to infiltrating the boys club and then taking it down.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the power that was acquired in the girl boss era was soft power as opposed to hard power. So it relied on the sanctioning and the enablement of men as opposed to that woman being fully embodied in her power. Again, going back to the leaders that I had early in my career, I was so lucky to have women that were strong feminine leaders and definitely not of the kind of girl boss philosophies. I think that when we are thinking about ambition, it's not something that has been categorized as a feminine trait to have. Like, nice girls don't want to push people down. Nice girls don't want to play the game. The thing is I think that is based on a misconception of the game doesn't need to be harsh. The game doesn't need to be you against other people. The game should be lifting other people up along with you. Right. And I think that's where power really does come from.
We did a video recently on the Tuesday show where we do more like video essay type stuff. About the Gen Z obsession with being a trophy girlfriend and a stay-at-home, I guess just person, because you're neither a wife nor a mother in a lot of these scenarios, a stay-at-home girly. But we kind of talked in that video about how, are you a millennial?
I am.
I'm same.
Elder millennial.
But I feel like if a lot of the millennial generation was kind of defined by this really sort of striving that, to your point, is about sort of assimilating into a masculine and frankly quite exploitative power structure, that there has been a sort of backlash in a younger generation in Gen Z towards, well, the whole work thing kind of screw it, I don't want to be a part of it, etc. And as we talk about in the video, I think we maybe have a tiny bit of distance on just how precarious it was for women to be in situations where they are not the arbiters of their own destiny, where they don't have any financial control, where they can't make their own choices. So obviously there's a middle ground, but my thinking also in creating that video was like, whether or not you are very career oriented, most people will have to work to some extent, and you want to be more intentional about it. So if someone, and a lot of the questions that we got for you kind of fit into this, if someone leans more toward the, well, I don't feel very career oriented, this doesn't light me up, so to speak, like, what are the strategies that you suggest where people can be more intentional with their career while not letting it take over their lives?
Yeah, no, and not your life defined by your work is something that's really important to me personally, because I've been on the other side of it and experienced the burnout that comes and kind of the discombobulation when the work goes away, because that's something that's happening to a lot of people right now as well. So I think that it has to start with getting clarity about what do you actually want your life to look like. And I think that so often when we think about career, we're thinking about your career, your paycheck, what that looks like, as opposed to how it fits into your whole entire life. And I think that if you back up and with the trend of like the stay-at-home girlfriends and things like that, is the ambition to actually want to not have any financial resources of your own and to be reliant on others? And I think for those people, a lot of them would answer no, right? That's probably why they're creating content and trying to monetize it. But I think getting into what do you actually want your life to look like and what do you actually want out of your career? Because your career needs to align with your interests. It needs to align with your talents. It needs to be things that maybe you don't love going to work every day. Like, I think that this concept of, follow your passion and you'll never work a day in your life. That's just not true, because I love my job and I don't want to work every day. And I've never wanted to work every day. But like most days I wake up and I don't hate my job. And if I wake up every day hating my job, then I need to look at, is this a job for me? Is it that I need to change companies because I'm being mistreated, or I don't have the right balance or the right support, or I'm not getting what I actually want out of the work element of my life? Or do I need to change career tracks to do something that is going to be more fulfilling, whether that's personally fulfilling, financially fulfilling, which is something I feel like gets villainized a lot as well. Or is there something else that I'm looking for in that?
Yeah. And in terms of, you, as you said, like, I feel the same way. Like, I do love what I do. And I currently have 2 projects and I'm working 7 days a week, which is the most unpleasant thing I've ever experienced. I was joking with my friend today. I always feel like, that feeling when you haven't slept and you're walking around and everything kind of feels like 2-dimensional and you're like, it's sort of like unable to perceive time and space a little bit. Like I kind of always feel like that.
Yeah.
And it's very temporary. So I'm like powering through. It's fine. But there is there are a lot of people who, not because they're doing 2 projects, not because it's a passion for them, not because they want to, are working like crazy. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the people that we work with, outside clients and third parties and things, they'll send us emails at 11 p.m. at night. Mm-hmm. We obviously don't answer them at that time.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I think, are working in a way that cannibalizes their life and they feel that it's necessary to work in that way in order to succeed. Can you talk about some pragmatic ways that you set boundaries in your work and that you recommend that other people do?
Yes. Oh, okay. So I have the best challenge, and I've brought so many people through this, and what happens on the other side of it is always shocking. So most of the people that I work with and have worked with in the past are working between 60 and 80 hours a week when they first meet me.
Wow.
And that's a lot. That's not sustainable. Like, that's not something, maybe temporary. If it's something that you're choosing to do, you can do. Like, that's your decision. But you don't want to be doing that for years and years and years as you theoretically pay some dues. When you're responding to emails at 11 p.m., though, what happens when you stop?
Right.
And the answer is usually you don't get an email in response and nobody is mad at it. Now, if someone is mad about it, then we have another situation, and then we need to start talking about, are you in the right work environment and do they have the right expectations of their employees? Because we know that there's a lot of toxic work environments and exploitation that does happen, especially with young professionals. But I think that's one thing that I always challenge people when they say, well, I have to work these many hours, I have to be on email. I'm like, but what happens when you stop? And usually when they actually stop, the solution is nothing. I also think because we are connected to our devices, your work email is always in your hand, right? And so you need to set some digital boundaries. I'm such an advocate for it, and I'm working on it myself. Time away from your phone. Like, put your phone away, put it in your bag, put it in a drawer, leave it in another room, and make sure that you have time and space. But also setting expectations of, I don't answer work emails after, say, 8 p.m. and just abiding to that rule unless it was like a genuine emergency, which needed to be handled, which for most of us, things could wait until the morning. Might not always feel that way. But I think having awareness of what am I actually willing to give, because my answer of what was I willing to give to my work and to my career 15 years ago or 12 years ago when I moved to New York City was very different, because I was in a very different place in my life. So back in the day, I didn't mind working 7 to 7 because I liked my job. I liked the things I was doing. I liked who I was working with. And now, absolutely not.
Oh, definitely. How do you know when things are worth it in a temporary sense? Like, how, not just in terms of I like what I'm doing, but this is specifically creating an opportunity that will benefit me.
Yeah. So I think people always cringe when I say this. It's about knowing what you're actually working towards. So I know that the 5-year goal is something that freaks out a lot of people, but I think having a general direction of where you actually want to go. So if I'm putting in this effort, if I'm putting in this labor, if I'm making these personal sacrifices, what is the end result? Is it that I'm going to get a massive pay raise? Am I going to get a promotion? Am I elevating my visibility that I can take to market into another opportunity that is going to give me those things? But if you're doing all of the work and you're not seeing any indicators of those things happening, then you need to reevaluate. Or if you've been doing those things for a sustained amount of time and are getting absolutely no positive impact in that in your own life and career, then it's also time to reassess.
And how, as I mentioned in the intro, for most people, the biggest increases in pay will happen when they change employers.
Yes.
And usually that will also, not always, but often come with a title change.
Yep.
With a lot of changes because, as I mentioned in the beginning as well, our raises are generally based on a starting salary, which the further back you started, the lower that was, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
And we know that most people are generally, if they've been at a company for a long time, they're underpaid compared to what they could be getting elsewhere. Is there a specific cadence at which you recommend people change employers? And as a, sort of backup to that question, or support to that question, do you recommend how often should people be in contact with things like headhunters?
I think everyone always needs to have a plan B.
Okay.
And I know that if you're, especially once you get a few years experience under your belt, if you just have a basic profile on LinkedIn, if you're in a corporate job, chances are you're going to have recruiters start to reach out to you. So it can be a matter of simply reaching out, like pinging those recruiters back, especially with the dynamics right now. And I mean, I come from the tech industry, so like that's just been so chaotic, and people that never worried about their jobs are terrified for their jobs right now. And I think that speaks to always having the plan B. I think in terms of like how often should you be making changes in your career, there's no hard and fast rule. It's a matter of what are you calibrating towards. So if you're looking for a big money jump, especially right now because there's been so much upward trajectory in salaries, if you want to optimize for increasing your pay, now is like if you can make a change, making a change, if it's been a while, is going to be advantageous. I think that getting the job title promotion is a little bit harder. I think some people think that that's just something that happens when you change jobs, but that's something that you need to be performing at that level in order to justify it with the offer. Otherwise, you might get the title without the pay that matches it. Which is probably not the situation you want to be in, because then you're still in that position where you want to be underpaid. I think making sure that you're aware of what salaries are actually doing, reading salary reports, talking to friends, there's not a lot of transparency. And I talk to way too many people who don't know what they should be making. And that's a guaranteed way to be underpaid. And it's so easy to do nowadays because the information is out there on like a million different websites. So making sure that you're always tracking to that is crucial. But also on the other side, I think that there's times that we optimize our career for advancement. There's times that we optimize our career for pay. And then there's other times that we're maybe optimizing for work-life balance, which is, I feel like a lot of people are in that era as well. But just knowing the exchanges and what you're really optimizing for is really key.
I would agree. Now, as I mentioned, we have an enormous amount of audience questions, so I'm going to get to some of them.
Cool.
So our top upvoted question for you is, what are ways I can exercise boundaries at work, specifically when interacting with management, i.e. turning down projects or opportunities that management tries to volunteer me for because I currently have other responsibilities to take care of?
Oh, this is such a good one. This is something that every ambitious high performer I have ever met has dealt with. And the reason why they're coming to you is because they know that you're going to be someone who delivers, and you probably have a track record of saying yes to things and not having any level of boundaries. So it's great that they can rely on you as long as it's getting you what you want in your career, like we just talked about. It becomes problematic when it is throwing your work-life balance out of whack and you're not actually getting the results that you want. So you end up doing a ton of thankless work. I think the first thing that we need to get really comfortable saying is just simply the word no. Is something that it's possible, it's easy. I'm not available. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't feel like I'm the right fit at this moment in time. How would you like me to reprioritize my tasks? There's a lot of softer ways for you to say it if you don't have the confidence to say no yet. But I think that we need to start drawing those lines. That's something that's really important, because doing thankless work that isn't advancing you is something that is going to make you really, really not like your job, which is not what you want, right? And also, I think the other thing is, and this is a piece of the equation that's always missing when I see, the clips on TikTok about this, is that we also need to assess the projects that are being handed to us that are outside of our job responsibilities, because what is the actual task and does it actually align with the goals that you have? Because I have heard of people that have been so overloaded that the thing they ended up saying no to was this massive project with high visibility that probably would have got them the promotion or would have helped them justify asking for a really big pay raise, but they just didn't have any capacity to do it, or they decided that day to start saying no. So you need to also assess, like, what is the visibility? What is the business impact? And also, I think, how is this going to allow me to utilize my strengths? Because if it doesn't utilize your strengths and it's going to be something that you need to agonize through, it's probably not something that you should be saying yes to.
I really agree with that. I also would say, I mean, I'm not a career expert, but as someone who has, been running a small business for a long time, who's had, employees, contractors, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think what is so important, and what, I talk about this as well. Like, if someone, for example, has another offer or knows that they're being underpaid and wants to stay at the company, the way you frame it, I think, should be something along the lines of, like, I really love my work here. I would love to stay here. Yeah. I would love to continue thriving with you guys, but I need to be at this place in order to do that. And, how can we make it work? Because more employers than you think would rather keep a good person than go hunting for a new one. But similarly, with not taking on a project, and to your point, taking on the projects that are best for you and best suited to you, framing it in the way of, like, I would love to do that. Right now, I'm not able. Yeah. And then specifically highlight the things that would need to be moved around. Yes. And maybe even have a suggestion or two about where it can go.
Yeah. No, I think appealing to self-interest, because if I, as a manager, am handing work to someone who isn't the right fit, doesn't have the bandwidth to do it, doesn't want to do it, they're not going to do the best job.
Right.
And if they end up dropping the ball or messing something up because they're so overloaded, we can only do so many things in a day, that's going to end up looking bad for me. So I think also framing it as coming from the other person's perspective, because if you just tell me no, that might feel like, well, no, you don't get to say that, because I think that I'm doing what is best for me, what is best for the team. But if you come to me with a reason of, this is why it's not in the best interest for me, this is why it's not in the best interest for the team, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, okay, like, I didn't think of that, thanks. And I think, to your point, like, having a suggestion of, like, well, I noticed Chad doesn't have a lot going on, like, maybe he has some availability, but making those suggestions, like, you're still offering a solution, you're still being helpful without taking on the extra labor.
Chad never has anything going on.
Chad never has anything.
As both a business owner and a person who wants to make sure that the people I love are taken care of if anything were to happen, life insurance has been a conversation that I've been having in my own personal life as of late. And being financially savvy, as you all know, means planning ahead for future you. Life insurance is an important part in financial planning because it helps make sure your loved ones are taken care of in the future. If you know life insurance is an important investment but are not sure where to start, Quility has you covered. Quility offers a completely digital quoting and purchasing experience with various 101 guides to guide you through the process. Quility's process covers how much you need, when you need it, and for how long. What people actually think costs over $50 a month can actually cost $20 a month, less than your car insurance, pet insurance, and probably less than a dinner out. To learn the who, what's, and why of life insurance, visit Quility.com/TFC. That's QUILITY.com/TFC.
We're excited to once again be partnering with Nutrafol here on the Financial Confessions. We actually talk about Nutrafol a lot around the office since our marketing director, Rachel, started using it earlier this year. To be totally honest, hair growth is not something that personally affects me, so I'm happy that we found a product that has had a positive impact for someone else on our team. We all know men experience hair loss, but many women do too, even though it's not as openly spoken about. But here at TFD, we tend to speak pretty openly with each other, and Rachel has openly spoken a lot about dealing with postpartum hair loss, as well as general changes in her hair texture and thickness since giving birth. After all of her other postpartum symptoms subsided, it's the one that has remained the longest. She's changed up the products she uses and stopped applying heat like hair dryers and curling irons completely, but nothing has made a real impact. She started taking 4 Nutrafol capsules every morning with breakfast and says she can already see a difference in the amount of hair she's shedding. We love that for her. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting the 5 root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism through whole body health. And in a clinical study, 86% of women reported improved hair growth after 6 months. You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and entering the promo code TFC to save $10 off your first month subscription. This offer is only available to U.S. customers for a limited time, plus free shipping on every order. Get $10 off at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code TFC. So this question was asked by one of our society members. If you're not one, click that join button or join our Patreon. So what are some tips that do not involve getting another degree for someone who wants a total career change with higher pay, but whose resume currently shows experience in food and retail?
Okay, I love this question
because
I think one of the things that we always default to when we are feeling like we're in a bit of a career rut is, oh, I'll go back to school. Like, I know people, I'll go get my MBA. Like, I'll spend $200,000 on that. Why not? Or they have their MBA. Okay, I'm going to go do a PhD. But when you have your PhD, you need your doctorate, your postdoctorate. Like, there's always another level of education. There's always another certificate. It's not always the solution. So you need to make sure that you're getting ROI on that. It's not that I'm anti-education. It's just making sure it's the right next step. So one of the things that I'm a huge advocate for is for prototyping the career change that you're trying to make. So what skills do you have? What abilities do you have? What talents do you have? And what's needed for that next role? And then connect the dots together. Because if you're applying for those jobs, the recruiter is not going to do it for you. The hiring manager is not going to do it for you. You need to have that clarity so that you can tell the story. And then for anything that is going to be a new skill, something that you need to develop in order to make that career change or just get that experience, find ways to get it. So that might be doing something like getting onto Fiverr and getting some project work, even if it's for low pay, but it's going to be something that you can add to your portfolio. You can add to your resume. You can write about on social media to market yourself. Is there ways that you can do it in the role that you're in now is something that a lot of people also underestimate, because especially if you're working at a bigger company, there's often ways that you can collaborate and volunteer some time for other teams if you have the bandwidth to do so. So getting creative in order to get the experience before you have the official title.
I love that. And I also think, people often will be very, and rightfully so, right? Like, be very reticent to take on things for low or no pay in the interest of advancing their career. And I'm always careful when I talk about this because, we above all advocate for, fair compensation, for labor rights, all that stuff.
Yes.
And working for free, like internships should be illegal. Unpaid internships should be illegal. Like, I think that they should not exist. However, I would be lying if I said that doing a lot of free or little pay work throughout my career didn't enable me to do an enormous amount of things that later paid dividends. And I will say that if you are specifically considering graduate school or any kind of degree as an option, just financially speaking, you may be much, much better served finding ways that you could work for free rather than work, which grad school is, putting yourself in massive debt.
Yes.
Like the number of people I even just know personally who started law school and then dropped out of it and now are carrying near 6 figures in debt for like a year or two of
I was a near miss. I was going to go to law school and decided right before, I was like, this is actually not the career for me. And thankfully didn't set any money on fire doing that. But I think that this is such a good point because you have to do the math of what's the cost of the degree that I'm going to get in lieu of the experience versus the cost of not getting top dollar to get the experience directly instead.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
sorry.
Especially in the States, like I'm from Canada, school was much more affordable than it is here. It was possible to graduate without enormous amounts of student debt. But it is so expensive here, and it is so, if you're graduating with, $100,000, $200,000 of debt in order to get that job, if you could have got it in the first place, you're saving yourself so much burden in terms of stress, financial insecurity potentially, as you are going to have to be paying those loans off.
Oh, 1,000%, especially if, as is often the case, you don't even finish the degree, which many people do not in grad school. And I also think we live in an era now where all of Harvard's curriculum is available for free on the internet. Yeah. You can, if the point is enrichment and education, which I think is a completely valid pursuit, you no longer have to pay to do that nearly in the same way that you used to. Information and education is more accessible than ever. And while there are certain jobs that gatekeep in an extremely tight way about certain qualifications and certifications, some more legitimately than others. Like, obviously you want your doctor to have their MD and have done all their residency and everything. But you don't need a specific degree to be in business 99% of the time. Most of those jobs, and by the way, like after a few years, they don't even look at your degree anymore. They don't care.
If they do, it's not really relevant.
Yeah, and if they do, to some extent,
that's a red flag.
That's a red flag for that employer that you're, 30 plus years old and they're like, where did you go to undergrad?
I had an executive level interview that they asked me about my GPA and club participation in university. I'm like, I went to school in Canada, GPA here, but we didn't have clubs, we didn't have fraternities, anything like that. And I'm not sure how relevant that is to the conversation right now. Like, my degree was in criminology and I was in tech.
I make it a personal point to never check anyone's education credentials because I don't have a degree. So I feel like it would be unfair of me to judge that on other people, for other people. But I will say I'm honestly in some ways more impressed by people who are less educationally qualified for what they're doing. They're just like really, because above all else, that means they're very good at learning and adapting and absorbing information.
Yeah, no. And I think there's so many workarounds. Like, it was definitely a bit of a complex for me when I arrived here because I felt like everyone went to like some fancy university. There's so many Ivy League graduates, especially in the tech industry. So many people had their MBAs. And I, again, had none of it, but you just figure out a way because the knowledge that you're going to gain in those institutions is the same. You can get it online for free. The networks can be very powerful, but you can still network without going to school. You can still build relationships without having to make such a large investment. And what was wild to me was that a few years into my work here, and I had been promoted a few times, but we started hiring, like, as my team was growing, we were hiring people and everyone had a master's degree or a PhD. And again, all of these fancy schools. And I was like, well, I don't have any of that. So, it was interesting because at a certain point I was working for the biggest SaaS company in the world, but I didn't on paper have the qualifications. And the people that I was hiring, like on paper, I had much more, but there were so many things that I knew how to bring to the table in terms of the strengths that I did have in lieu of those things. And then having the ability to I think personal branding is something that is a great way to overcome a lot of that. And I know that personal branding is something that makes a lot of people roll their eyes. But if your name is out there just in your professional industry, people get to know you. You start to build, and especially when there's certain needs of like, okay, you're the person who can do this thing. And the more that you can make that unique to you, I really feel like more opportunities, like doors start to swing open.
I agree. And I also think that an underexplored phenomenon is how often the things, not just the things that you're taught, but the ways that you're taught to operate in an academic setting are the opposite of the way you need to operate in a professional setting. Not always, but a lot of times, because academia is a very specific space it's extremely hierarchical. It's extremely, It's extremely process oriented in the sense of like you have to do a large amount of very specific things to someone else's standards, and things have to be done in a very specific way. There are an enormous amount of structures around everything you do, whereas often in business, it is, in fact, it can be often totally irrelevant how things get done. The important thing is just doing them and being more effective and more efficient, and more sort of dynamic in your collaboration and in the way you operate, not cutting corners per se, but finding more clever ways to do things that don't adhere to a set structure of how things are done, which is often the opposite of what people learn in academia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is this big disconnect. And I think it's one of the stories, I think it's one of the myths, especially in terms of career success, is that academically, when you work hard, when you're a high performer, you're going to get good grades. Your good grades will get you into the school that you want, the program that you want, and maybe it's even going to get you the first job that you want. But once you get into that first job, being a hardworking high performer is now something that's going to open you up to being over leveraged at work, overworking yourself, And I know a lot of people that have faced that problem of they become too good to promote. They've made themselves indispensable. So why is their boss going to promote them when it would hurt them and hurt the team? So the very things that help you succeed in academics and in post-secondary school are the very things that can actually hold you back in the corporate world.
Oh, and also the sense of self-advocacy is very different in the corporate in the sort of business sphere, in the sense that, to your point, if you check every box academically, you will sort of definitionally succeed against a certain kind of criteria. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want like the academics to jump on me. I know there's a lot of politics. I know there's a lot of favoritism. I know it's not perfect in that sense, and self-advocacy is important in academia as well. However, I do think in the more corporate environment, there is such a, as we were talking about earlier, this sense of like saying no to things, saying like, oh, I shan't be doing that, but here's what I'll do instead. And really having to put your foot down with people who may be higher on the hierarchy than you. Like, that is sort of anathema in a lot of academic contexts, but in the professional environment, if you don't operate that way, to your earlier point, like, you will get absolutely steamrolled.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing, because we talked about Chad earlier, is we've all also worked with that person who doesn't really pull their weight. They're not necessarily the greatest performer, but they are the favorite. So they're the ones who are getting opportunities. They're the ones who are getting praise. They're coming around and like snatching your ideas, and you're getting really mad about it. But instead of getting really mad about it, what we actually need to do is we need to look to what can we actually learn from Chad and what can we take from him to leverage for ourselves. And it's not that I advocate for being lazy or anything like that. Like, I kind of put it like that on YouTube because, you kind of have to play to the algorithm in that regard. But it's really about managing your workload and managing your energy and managing your own performance. And a huge thing that I think is really under discussed is, again, it goes back to that personal brand and perception, because your actual performance doesn't really matter. Because you can have a metric scorecard, but for a lot of roles, there is still going to be that qualitative rating that your boss is going to give you. Or you can have all of the right metrics, but you're not going to necessarily be progressing. You're not necessarily going to get the biggest pay increase or the biggest bonus because of them, because it is going to go to the person that has the higher perceived potential.
Potential is a killer. Okay. Strategies for when you really disagree with a superior. Do you give in or take the issue higher up?
Oh, this is a loaded question because I feel like it's really situational. I think I'm a really big fan of the improv tactic of yes and this took me an unfortunate amount of time to figure out that I can agree with someone but then disagree with them and actually change their perspective. So if I disagree with something that my boss is telling me, like, you need to go and have this conversation with this client, but I know that client's going to get really, really mad and we're going to have all sorts of issues, I can say yes, and I should also do this before that. And if I can get buy-in. So most people don't like to be told that they're wrong. It's something that we generally want to avoid telling people. It doesn't make them feel very good, doesn't really get them agreeing with you, just because it is going to trigger defense mechanisms. But that is something that can be very, very helpful. I think the other thing is that stepping back from the situation and just asking genuinely curious questions of, okay, I just want to understand the logic. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your experience? Because just because we disagree with something that we're being told doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, because I don't know about you, I'm not always right, even though I would love to always be right. So understanding the other person's perspective of maybe they have a particular experience. Maybe there's something that we haven't seen, because especially with management, one thing that I think is very common is there's a lot of communication gaps in between management and their teams. They have knowledge of upper level discussions that are happening, maybe other things that are going on in the company, that they're not always actually telling you about, that is the necessary context for you to understand what it is. So I think asking questions just to understand it, because those questions can also shine a light on where maybe some gaps are that they see it themselves without us having to tell them.
Totally. And I also think, it's important that everyone kind of do the calculation in their own work environment of the fine line between what is a normal amount of hierarchy and authority in a work environment, and what is toxic, and what is like I just have a genuinely bad boss who's like not capable of taking feedback, who, you know, is a dictator, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would be interested if you have any kind of lines that you would draw in terms of like, this is okay, this is not.
Yeah, this is okay. I could talk about this for hours because I think this is a really nuanced thing that, because of the way that social media works, has been really conflated. Of what's the difference between a boss who isn't a very good boss and an actual toxic boss that you need to get the F away from is a really big distinction to make. And I think for that, there's a couple of things that really come into play. So first of all, is this boss trying to support you, or are they trying to get in your way? Because a toxic manager is not actually trying to help you. They are trying to make your life a lot harder. Whether that's giving you permission to take the day off, listening when you say no without having the authoritative conversation that can follow that with a toxic manager, or even, you know, just helping you with your professional development and giving you the resources, space, mentorship, whatever it is that you need that they can actually help with. So that's one big distinction. The next is going to be, how do they help you when you do have a problem? Do they approach you with shame? Do they approach you with blame? Or do they help you try to problem solve without judgment? This is a really big one. I know some bad managers have a hard time with that, but it is something that generally, even if it is the initial reaction, they will go into solution mode. Versus a toxic manager is just going to be, this is all your fault. You caused all these problems. And it's going to be something that kind of sticks within the conversation. But then I think the main two are autonomy and trust. And I say those ones together because they really are mutually, they're a symbiotic relationship. You can't have autonomy in your job if you don't have trust within your job. And I think that a toxic environment ultimately is a low trust environment. It's where people don't trust each other. It's where they don't trust themselves, and they don't feel like they can be trusted to do their best work. And that's where a lot of very negative experiences and behaviors are manifesting from.
I highly recommend the book Conflict is Not Abuse for like differentiating, and this is outside of just the work environment, obviously, this is in general, for differentiating between what is a necessary human level of confrontation and what is something to actually be, you know, very wary of, or to really need to distance yourself from. Now, I just happen to be a person who is more comfortable with confrontation, and by the way, I think confrontation often always has a very negative connotation, but I actually think in many cases it can be quite the opposite. You know, like with my closest friendships, there will be moments where we'll say openly, you know, that didn't feel good, or I didn't like that, what have you. And we'll have the conversation, or it was like, it really would have meant a lot to me if you came or did this. When you didn't, it made me sad, whatever. That is a form of confrontation in the sense that you're confronting the issue, but it's being done in a healthy way that is mutually respectful, and that is most importantly with an interest of improving the relationship. And as it pertains to work, I think similarly, we have to have space to disagree. And obviously, if, to your point, if you don't feel that there is even space to do that, that's a big red flag. But kind of more than that, I think some people, when they're describing discomfort with work situations, again, sometimes it is a really toxic environment, but also sometimes it's a very, very personal fear and avoidance of any kind of conflict. Again, conflict which can be productive and mutually beneficial in nature. And I think it's also important to do on a personal level some self-work around, how do I phrase things when I disagree? How do I advocate for myself when I feel like I'm not being listened to or respected? Like, how do I become comfortable with confrontation in the positive sense of the word?
Yes. Well, and conflict ultimately is the same as negotiation. It's communication. It's effective communication. It's not always going to be easy, but it is where you are going to find the most movement and the most progress, is when you're having those straightforward conversations. One thing, especially when the conflict is, you feel like conflict is being aimed at you, a question that I ask people now, and I tell people to ask themselves in those situations even, is this person trying to be helpful, or are they trying to be harmful?
Right.
Because often it is that they are trying to be helpful, and it's just manifesting in a way that maybe is triggering to you for some reason, is not being delivered in the best way. People have different ways of having conflict. I worked with 2 people that loved yelling at each other. They absolutely loved it. They thought it was the greatest thing. They're like, we can just have these conversations and be real, and there is no BS involved. And I was like, this is really abrasive for me. Like, my heart is up when you guys are yelling at each other in the office and causing a spectacle. But for them, it was a dynamic that did work. Did it work for me? Absolutely not. I'm not going to be in that conversation. And if you approach me like that, it's not going to go well. But for them, it was something. So we also need to appreciate where people are coming from and where we are in those dynamics. And I think, like, if one of them had approached me and yelled, I'd be like, you know what? It is not going to be a good conversation if we're approaching it like this. So why don't we just calm down and come back to it? Yeah. Or, if you level it down, we can talk about this right now, but this is what I need in order for us to resolve this.
That's hilarious. Like, if someone came up to you and you're like, I am not one of your little yelling friends.
That is not going to happen.
Not for me.
It's such an essential boundary that is so easy to enforce. And again, we need to be empowered to assert the boundaries in terms of how we're treated, how we work, where we work, all of those things. And I think one of the biggest things that we've been taught, especially as women, is that we're just supposed to accommodate everyone as opposed to being accommodated.
Totally. What's interesting? My husband used to be a consultant, and he once worked at this financial company that is notorious for having a very, very, what I would consider to be unhinged work culture, but I guess it works for them, and they are very high performing. But like, every conversation is recorded. It's like everything is stand up. Like, they're, what you described about 2 people yelling, it's like a whole company of that. Yeah. And again, everything is recorded, and they'll often play things back to each other to like,
it's so petty.
I'm like, and it's like, of course, like 90% men, I'm sure, in that company. I'm like, all of you to the therapist's office now. But like, there is this feeling, like, in some ways, when I look at that, I think that is, again, unhinged. I would never want to work there. Yeah. I think he did like 6 months there, and he was like, oh my God. He was like, that shaved 6 months off my life. Like, that was terrible. But interestingly, like, in some ways I look at that and I think, well, what is the polar opposite of that work environment, which a lot of people have experienced as well, which is where everything is sniping, backbiting, misrepresenting each other, politics happening behind closed doors, like favoritism, like unspoken, like no transparency. Yeah. And I do think that if what is often most unpleasant for us, which it is for me for sure, is that feeling of a lack of transparency and understanding, in order to get to transparency, there will inevitably be conversations that not everyone loves.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be able to address the good and the bad. And I think the more that you as a person can see that there's not any judgment or anything that is being done wrong. Like, think about it. When you confront your friend because they did something that hurt you, are you trying to hurt them in response? You're absolutely not. You're just trying to maintain a strong relationship, right? The same thing is going to go with our coworkers, with our managers, with anyone that we interact with at work. So the thing that I actually think is that conflict is helping the other person when you are the one originating the conversation, because it shows that you value them, that you trust them, and that you want to enable their best version of themselves and help them succeed. And you're helping to communicate the information in that situation where everyone is going to be successful.
Well said. Tips for someone who likes the company that they work for, but is in a junior position and wants to move up and get the pay increase that goes with it. But it is clear and has been mentioned that the company is not making great money right now. Jumping ship is not easy and not something I want to do unless I have to, yet I feel like I'm going to be stuck where I'm at much longer than I want to be.
This goes back to knowing what your goals are. So if you really feel like you're at that level where you've outgrown the role that you're in, you're not going to continue to be happy getting up and going to work if you're at that same level. I think, first of all, and back to what you said, is have that direct conversation with your manager, because even if the company isn't having strong financial performance right now, I know that there's a lot of promotion holds right now. There's a lot of hiring holds that are in some places. But have the conversation of what is actually happening right now, because your manager will be able to help with that. And then it removes the guesswork. And they can give you timelines of, I see that this could be a possibility 6 months from now, 3 months from now. Or they can be like, I don't see when this is going to happen based on what's happening right now. But you're going to have clarity and information, and then you can make the appropriate conversation, like the appropriate decisions and the appropriate moves. Also, when you have that conversation with your manager, if they're like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen, it really sucks when you have to leave somewhere that you really love. But if you're at that point where you're not going to be happy in that position, it's time to do it. And you'll probably find that you have the support from your manager. If they're not able to meet your needs and get you to that next level when they know that you're ready for it, they might be able to make introductions, make referrals, or just be a reference point for you to get to that next level elsewhere.
I think also something someone told me once that has always stuck with me is never underestimate the human brain's desire to stay with what is familiar. Like,
Yes.
we really will do almost anything to justify staying in what's familiar to us.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you also can, but like I can look back on certain jobs and I'm like, what the hell was I doing there? But I was terrified of leaving, even though it was a terrible situation.
Yeah, but it's a danger that you know, right? So, and it does go back to like, if you want to get into the brain science of it, your amygdala does activate anytime that there is a change in your situation, because a change is danger. You don't know what's going to happen next. Your brain, for being the source of all of your intelligence, knows nothing. It is really not intelligent on its own. So if it's not working off of a model that you already know of, what's this new company really going to be like? It's going to detect a lot of danger because it just doesn't know. And that's how it's supposed to keep you safe back when we were cave peeps. But now it's not necessarily as helpful for that to be kicking in. And that's why, like, you know, you have new job nerves when you're making that transition. But knowing that on the other side, chances are, as long as you know what you're looking for, interview companies as much as they're interviewing you. That's something that's really important that I really want more people to do. Make the right decision for you and know that it is going to work out for you. And worst case scenario, you get to the next company and you don't love it or you hate it. There's always more opportunities out there. You don't have to work there forever.
I totally agree. So our last question, tips for pushing for pay transparency in our workplace when you've been promised changes from management but never get them.
Well, luckily, states are starting to bring about pay transparency. So now it's on the books in New York, Colorado, California as well. I can't remember if it's already in place or if it's coming, but I think that those laws are really important in terms of you need to know, even just as a job seeker, what you're looking for, because why are you going to waste time applying for a job that can't afford to pay you well, right? And I think that also helps people get the right benchmarks. Now, when you're in a company, it's also going to expose what their actual pay bands are. And I know that there has been several stories that have gone viral of people realizing that they were being underpaid by mid-5 figures or higher because of salary transparency laws. So I think it's a weird thing to talk to people about money, because what if you're the person making more than other people, or what if you're the person making less than other people? You don't want to make anyone feel bad, but if you're going to feel bad, you want to know so that you can have the right conversation, right? In the US, like in most states, they can't prohibit you from discussing salary with your coworkers, even if they are discouraging it. It is something that I do suggest that you do. Also, having conversations and networks within your industry, and again, keeping up to date on salary reports, what is actually happening right now. Look at jobs in general that are being posted, and arm yourself with information, because when you have the metrics there, it's harder to negotiate a big increase in a job that you're already in, because you lack the leverage of they're not trying to get you to sign on the dotted line. They already have you. You're already dependent on the paycheck. But this is also such an argument for, you know, cultivating your finances and having resources available that if you're not being treated right, if you're being underpaid, you are also in a position that you're able to walk or know that you can find an opportunity that is going to pay you properly.
I totally agree. And I also think, remember, employers cannot prevent you from speaking with other employees about pay. Like, that is really important. Now, you want to be careful who you talk to, because some people are little rats and they'll go to management and poison your relationship. But like, there can be some backbiting. However, a lot of people operate under the misperception that you can be fired for talking about pay with other employees. That is not true.
Absolutely. No, and I mean, the other thing is some people might not be truthful with you about what they say either. I know, especially in some competitive roles, like if you're talking to salespeople, they're all competing with each other, so you might not get the right answer from everyone that you talk to. But I think especially when you know what's happening in your industry, that's going to give you a good read in terms of, is this person just completely lying to me right now? Or is it about like accurate and I need to be advocating for myself?
I totally agree. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. It has been such a pleasure. I really, really love your approach to this stuff. I think it's so smart and balanced, and where I identify, which is like definitely ambitious, definitely about being intentional and advocating for yourself, but not girl bossy and about assimilating into the men's club at any cost, which is, glad that's over.
Oh, we can go ahead and change the game and build a new one.
Yes, and we can have as many smiley faces in our communications as we like.
100%. And exclamation points.
Exclamation points. We're happy. I'm sorry. Is it wrong to be happy and excited about things? I say no.
No, it's not.
So where can people go to find more of what you do and get your book?
Yeah, so first of all, my YouTube channel, you can just search Jennifer Brick. I should pop right up. And then my book, you can go to careerglowupbook.com, and then it has all the links to buy it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next Monday on an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. Goodbye, guys.